Welcome to the 5th Annual Virtual Abolitionist Day. I'm Ross Ettrick, President of the Thaddeus Stevens Society. Abolitionist Day started in 2017 in reaction to a Confederate flag demonstration by the Sons of Confederate Veterans in 2016. That demonstration was held up at the Gettysburg Park Peace Light by the Sons of Confederate Veterans, and there were counter demonstrations. One was particularly led by Scott Hancock, a professor at Gettysburg College. While his group was very respectful, other demonstrators were rather rude, shouting a lot of obscenities at the neo-Confederates. As a result, I thought the next time that there was a Confederate flag demonstration that we would have people dressed in Civil War period costumes, broadcasting quotes from famous abolitionists. As it turned out, there were no further Confederate flag days held. However, we did hold the first Abolitionist Day in 2017 at the Gettysburg Seminary Rectory, where we portrayed famous abolitionists such as Harriet Tubman, William Lloyd Garrison, and of course Thaddeus Stevens. Here is a clip from that first Abolitionist Day.
Okay, we will be hearing from people who led the movement and about their brave deeds and their words to liberate 4 million people from slavery. For those not familiar with me, I was the most powerful congressman during and after the Civil War. I helped persuade Lincoln to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. I am the father of the 14th Amendment, the single most important amendment to the Constitution, requiring equal treatment under the law and also extending civil liberties to the state level. I helped shepherd the 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery, through the Congress. I also spearheaded the impeachment of Andrew Johnson and was one of the architects of Reconstruction. The heritage of human bondage is the heritage represented by the Confederate flag that some would celebrate. As I said in Congress, those who claim that Southern leaders were motivated by a desire to redress grievances, real or imagined, greatly mistake the real object of the traitors. They rebelled for no redress of grievances, but to establish a slave oligarchy which would repudiate the doctrines of the Declaration of Independence and justify the establishment of an empire based on the principles of kings, lords, and slaves. And what a glorious victory we had over that empire of evil. We wiped out the most infernal blot that has ever disgraced the annals of mankind. We wrote a page in history so bright it eclipsed all the heroes and sages. We struck the chains of 4 million and made them free. My first guest today could be said to be the father of the abolition movement, William Lloyd Garrison, the editor of the Liberator newspaper and the founder of the American Anti-Slavery Society. We have an actual copy of the Liberator at our display table over there if you'd like to see it. Thank you, Mr. Garrison, for your service to the millions of liberated persons.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens, for your leadership in the Congress in our glorious cause. While there were many who said I was too severe, I said the cause of human liberty is a severe situation requiring severity. As I wrote in our first edition of the Liberator in 1831, and I quote, "I will be as harsh as truth, as uncompromising as justice on this subject. I do not wish to think, speak, or write with moderation. No, no, no. Tell a man whose house is on fire to give out a moderate alarm. Tell him to moderately rescue his wife from the hands of the ravisher. Tell the mother to gradually extricate and moderately rescue her infant from the fire into which it has fallen. But urge me not to use moderation in a cause like the present one. I am in earnest. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will not retreat a single inch, and I will be heard.
Quite fiery words, Mr. Garrison, and they earned you a great deal of animosity.
Yes, indeed. The Georgia legislature offered $5,000 for my kidnapping to that state to stand trial for daring to speak against the slaver empire. And though I was more or less safe in Boston, even there a mob of 1,000 people in 1835 caught me, tied a rope around my waist, pushed me through the streets of Boston to tar and feather me on Boston Common. Fortunately, the Boston mayor, a fellow abolitionist, had me arrested in the nick of time and put in jail for my protection.
Those were dangerous times. It reminds me of the time that I was rushed by a Bowie knife-wielding Southerner in the House of Representatives. Fortunately, my colleagues restrained me. Charles Sumner, the senator from your state of Massachusetts, was not so lucky and was nearly beaten half to death by a crazy maniac Southerner.
Yes, yes, they were dangerous times. But you, Stevens, and I remained faithful, despite the threats. As I said back then, be faithful, be vigilant, be untiring in your efforts to break every yoke, and let the oppressed go free. Come what may, cost what it may, inscribe upon that banner which you unfurl to the breeze as your moral and your political motto: no compromise with slavery, no union with slave holders.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garrison. My next guest is Harriet Tubman, the Black Moses of her people. Leading the multitudes out of slavery through the Underground Railroad, she herself escaped slavery in 1849, but she went back time and again to free her family and friends. Welcome to Abolitionist Day, Miss Tubman.
Thank you, Mr.
She's a little person, but very pretty.
I want to say that anyone who pays tribute to the Confederate flag is paying tribute to the devil. Slavery is the next thing to hell. Growing up in slavery, I was whipped, I was beaten. And once my slave owner took a weight so heavy and hit me in the head, it caused me a lifetime of dizziness and fits. I can still remember the day I escaped slavery. When I found I had crossed the line, I had to look at my hands to see if I was the same person. There's such glory over everything. The sun through the trees looked like gold over the fields. I felt like I was in heaven. But I was not content to be free. I had to free others. I went back and again until I brought over 70 people to freedom. I was the conductor of the Underground Railroad for over 8 years. And I can say, like most conductors cannot, I never ran my train off the track, and I never lost a passenger. I carried a pistol with me. I I was not afraid to use it against friend or foe. Once I had a passenger so frightened, he wanted to return back to captivity. I put the gun to his head and I said, "You go or die." This gentleman here, Mr. Garrison, gave me the name Black Moses. I try mighty to live up to that name. I told my passengers, if you hear dogs, keep going. If you see torches in the woods, keep going. If you hear shouting after you, keep going. Don't ever stop. Keep going. If you want to taste freedom, keep going.
Thank you for those very moving words, Ms. Thomas.
Hello, I'm Sheila Sapinski. For our second Abolitionist Day, Ross Hedrick and Judy Young created vignettes about abolitionist heroes with Southern roots. In our first video clip, we present a man who escaped slavery and became an internationally renowned author, orator, activist, and statesman, Frederick Douglass, portrayed by Isaiah Washington. The second clip shows two women who spied for the Union, aided Union prisoners and fugitive slaves, Elizabeth Van Lew, portrayed by Dee Ross, was a Richmond socialite who ran a spy ring, and Mary Richards Bowser, portrayed by Bria Litz, who was a former slave believed to have spied in the Confederate White House. We tune in to the Richmond Post Office in 1870 after the war, just after the passage of the 15th Amendment, which granted formerly enslaved men the right to vote. Elizabeth is reading from her wartime diary.
Good afternoon. I'm Frederick Douglass, and welcome to the second annual Abolitionist Day, where we honor the brave men and women who fought against the scourge of slavery. Today, we are honoring Southern abolitionists. As we recognize these bravest of the brave, other people across the country are holding ceremonies for the traitorous flag of the Confederacy. Instead of honoring a flag of a regime that sought to establish a country to continue the enslavement of its fellow Southerners, they should embrace their heritage of courageous abolitionism. Contrary to what so-called Southern heritage advocates will tell you, over 39% of the people of the South were against slavery. How can that be, you ask? Well, the slaves were against slavery, and there were 3.5 million of them out of a total population of 9 million in the Confederate States. And there were many whites against slavery, but you don't hear too much about them because they were either suppressed or run out of the South by the police state that dominated the region. Southern abolitionism is as Southern as collard greens and fried chicken. Not only did we advocate for freedom before the war, but we fought for it during the war with 180,000 black men joining the Union Army, making it the largest slave army in world history. Now that is something every Southerner should be proud of. I was one of the loudest Southern voices against slavery before the Slaveholders' Rebellion. I was born on the eastern shore of Maryland in 1818 and was moved to Baltimore when I was 12. There, my owner's wife, Sophia, taught me my ABCs before her husband forbid her from teaching more, saying literacy would only encourage slaves to desire freedom. But that did not stop me from learning to read. I would pay little white boys to teach me from the meager tips I would receive for errands. I also devoured any scraps of newspapers or discarded books I could get my hands on. Knowledge is the pathway from slavery to freedom. In my later years, I wrote an open letter to my former owner, condemning him for obstructing the education of his slaves. Your wickedness and cruelty and disrespect on your fellow creatures was greater than all the stripes you laid upon my back or theirs, I wrote. I tried twice to escape in the 1830s, but did not succeed. I finally succeeded in 1838 with the help of my future wife, Anna Murray, a free black in Baltimore. Dressed as a sailor with forged papers, I traveled by train and steamboat to New York City. A new world had opened upon me. If life is more than breath and the flow of blood, I lived more in one day than in a year of my slave life. It was a time of joyous excitement, which words cannot tamely describe. I then moved up to Massachusetts and became a licensed preacher in the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. I then began my career as an abolitionist speaker, and that is when I met William Lloyd Garrison, the editor of the Liberator newspaper and head of the American Anti-Slavery Society. Garrison encouraged my speaking efforts and included me in the Society's 100 Convention Tour of 1843, where abolitionists spoke at meeting halls throughout the East and the Midwest. Pro-slavery thugs would attend some of these meetings, and on one occasion, I was chased down and beaten. A Quaker family came to my rescue, but my hand was broken, and it continued to plague me for the rest of my life. Then, in 1845, I wrote the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave, which became an instant bestseller and was reprinted 9 times with 11,000 copies sold in America. Editions were also translated in French and Dutch. I then went to Ireland and England from 1846 to 1848 to raise money for the anti-slavery cause. My lectures were crowded to suffocation, and I also found that in these countries, I was not treated as a colored, but as a man. While I was there, many supporters were concerned that if I returned to America, I could be legally kidnapped by my former owner. So they raised 150 pounds sterling to pay my owner for my liberty, something the Declaration of Independence said was an inalienable right. It was hard to leave England with so many supporters and the air of equality. But my wife was still in America, and I could not forsake 4 million brothers and sisters in bondage. I came back in 1848 and started the North Star newspaper in Rochester, New York. Its motto was, right is of no sex. Truth is of no color. God is the Father of us all, and we are all brethren. I also took part in the Seneca Falls Convention of 1848, the beginnings of the women's movement in America. During the slaveholder rebellion, I campaigned continuously to recruit blacks into the military, and I helped form the famous 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment. 2 of my sons were members, and a 3rd was a recruiter. After the war, I pushed for black voting and held a variety of positions, including being the head of the embassy in the Dominican Republic, president of the Freedmen's Bank, and United States Marshal for the District of Columbia. Less than a month before I died in 1895, a young man asked me for advice. I told him, agitate, agitate, agitate.
Mayor always said I should publish this Civil War diary. It would be dangerous, of course. I'm criticized as it is for using my post postmaster's privilege to publish and distribute the statements of former slaves. If I did publish, I would be certain to include this description of what caused the war: slavery. No pen, no book, no time can do justice to slavery's wrongs, its horrors. While slaves were punished for any little thing, misdemeanor or stubbornness, they would be placed in a coffin with holes over their face to breathe through for entire days, while they were whipped almost to death, and the blood would be in puddles where they were whipped. The whipper would draw his fingers through the lashes as if the whip were milking it to rid it of the blood. Free countries have no scapegoats such as our slaves. Slave power is arrogant, is jealous, is intrusive, is cruel, is despotic, not only over the slave, but over the community, over the state. Slave power crushes freedom of speech and opinions. Men, like the editors of the Inquirer and the Dispatch, found exciting occupation in whipping up a popular frenzy for secession. And the clergy, why, relying on the protection of their gowns, called slavery a Christianizing institution, and encouraged Southerners to become drunk on the odor of our own sanctity. The origin of secession lay in the false teaching, the false preaching, and the corrupt press of slave power. Well, General Grant and I helped to end slave power. Why, look who's here! Oh, Mary, I was hoping for a letter, and here you are in person. Oh, my goodness.
Elizabeth, or should I say postmaster, I went to Churchill and they told me about your appointment. I'm so happy for you.
Oh, thank you so much, Mary. And it is so good to have you here. So tell me, what brings you to Richmond? And how is your teaching? Why, when the Freedmen's Bill would only give me a clerkship, I was comforted by knowing that at least you were teaching your people.
And I really loved it, and it made such a difference. Now, what they taught me in New Jersey, educating freedmen is the key. But I'm on to a new project now. I've remarried, and Mr. Garvin has a good job, so we'll be starting a family here. But he told me to come back for today's celebration, since it'll be too hard to travel once the baby comes. I see you have your flag hanging to celebrate the 15th Amendment being ratified.
Of course.
Then I knew you were still the same Elizabeth Van Lew.
Of course.
But you're the only flag hanging in the white part of town, though. But I got invited to speak at the procession as one of the first to teach freedmen here. This is partly our success, yours and mine. Aren't you proud?
Oh, Mary, I am proud. And it is so good to have you here. Can you come and you and your husband stay with us on Churchill?
Yes.
Oh, that's good. I'm so happy for you. But I'm so sorry that you had to leave your teaching.
Oh, so do I. But I can't blame him. See, funding for freedmen's schools still often just a dream. What I got paid barely paid for the cost of heating books. When I closed St. Mary, it was clear I never make more than $10 an hour instead of the $47 I was supposed to receive. There was people that came by trying to threaten me for teaching freedmen. But the biggest disappointment was the school not giving us any funding.
Well, if they thought they could intimidate you, they were fools. I never knew a braver woman. But, you know, money is another matter, too. Mary, it was very much the same for me here. After the war, I barely made ends meet until I got the appointment with the clerkship at the Freedmen's Bureau. Things are different now. I'm working for the general again. Remember?
Oh, I certainly do, Elizabeth. Do you still have your watch?
Oh, do I? My goodness. I couldn't part with this cipher somehow. It took me a while to learn how to put those messages in code. But by the time I was sending those last messages to General Grant, it was second nature.
Oh, that code and that invisible ink. It seemed like some kind of game, and for them I think it was. But after all we were doing, getting Union soldiers out of jail and back up north and runaways to New York, then spying at the Davis mansion, I can feel my back stiffen when Captain Howard told me to play that part.
Oh, I am so sorry, Mary. I still feel guilty that I told him to ask you. I just couldn't find the tongue to tell you that they wanted you to pretend to still be a slave so that we could hire you out to work for Mrs. Jefferson Davis.
Yes, Mrs. Isaac coming, Mrs. Oh, here's the book you wanted, Mrs. Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. I couldn't read, so I didn't know I gave it to you upside down. After all my education, that 3 years of faking complete ignorance, scrubbing floors and waiting tables for the President of the Confederacy practically killed me. But it was all worth it, see. Once I maneuvered my way into Mr. Davis' library, there was a wealth of rebel documents there for me to read. And then there was those dinners.
Oh, Mary, you were truly a marvel. All the information that you brought for us. In the morning, I would say, "What news, Mary?" And you would never fail to have something very important to help the Union.
That Council of Generals, yes. I got so used to memorizing things, I practically remembered word for word. But what really helped General Grant was hearing how Jubal Early insisted on more men being sent to him, since he was holding the valley and that part of the rebel line
Were mere skeletons, especially at Chesterfield. Oh, yes, Mary, I just remember it, every bit. Oh, my hands were shaking as I put it into code and then into the invisible ink. And I put that message in the ironwork above the mantel so that Judy in the morning could take it and put it in her apron pocket, go out to the hen house, put it in a hollow egg. And then Peter Roan came and took the basket of eggs on to the next messenger. Oh, yes, that was so incredible. And I do remember how important it was for the General Grant to know that this was finally the time for an advance.
Oh, how could you put that in your journal?
Well, let's see. What a moment. The chains, the shackles, fell from thousands of captives, and thousands of arms fell powerless to wield the Christianizing lash. Civilization advanced a century. Justice, truth, humanity was vindicated.
Civilization advanced a century. Well, that's still true, Elizabeth. Whatever happened after that? Did you ever was able to publish that wonderful diary?
The newspapers got word of me considering it, and the hate that spewed out, I just couldn't do it to my poor mother.
Poor Eliza, such a sweet lady.
Oh, and have a daughter like me.
In 2019, we reenacted the founding of the Adams County Anti-Slavery Society, which was met by a violent reaction by residents of Adams County. Then we showed the struggle of Kitty Payne to escape slavery. At the end of the event, the audience was led in a rousing song of John Brown's Body by the band Dearest Home.
Okay. Everyone, welcome to the first organizational meeting of the Adams County Anti-Slavery Society. I want to introduce Professor William Reynolds. Oh, yes. William Reynolds, a professor at our local college, who will explain what it is that we are fighting against.
Thank you, Mr. McAllister. What we are here today to confront is the greatest crime in human history. Slavery, the slavery empire to the south, just 20 miles south of here, is so grand, it dwarfs anything else known. It dwarfs in its brutality and its size slavery in the Roman Empire, the pagan Roman Empire. Very few profit off of this system. It's a small minority that amass riches off of the backs of millions. Millions of poor wretches are forced to sleep on dirt floors and to eat from troughs like common farm animals. As Christians, as fellow human beings, we cannot allow this to continue. Therefore, I am here to introduce a motion to establish the Adams County Anti-Slavery Society.
Excuse me, sir. Excuse me. We should slow down on any actions that may offend our southern neighbors. I am Richard Bond, the new Memphis Minister from Maryland, and all these crimes to interfere in the states of southern slavery is inexpedient and improper. Furthermore, I want all of you to consider, that this anti-slavery agitation will cause Southerners to no longer purchase from my carriage industry.
I object most strenuously to the gentleman's interruption. I'm Daniel Payne, a student at the Lutheran Seminary and a free native of South Carolina. And I can personally attest to the evil effect slavery has on a society.
Who cares what you have to say, Darky?
Let the man speak. He knows more about slavery than you ever will know.
Who cares what they do down south? Stop being such troublemakers.
It's none of our business! None of our business!
God, you're throwing rotten tomatoes and dead cats! This is an absolute madhouse. Here, Professor. No. We can't organize anything here. No. We have to go someplace else and take our meeting elsewhere.
Yes, we need to get away from these ruffians.
Get out of here!
Let us go to the Academy House. You know the one, Washington and Hot.
Yes, excellent idea. Let's go.
There we found our old Mistress Mary crying. The visage will always be before my mind. It was a very sad time for my mother and her. We were too young to know what the future meant. A return to slavery. By that night, we were back at Maddox Farm. Our friend Mary was so upset by her nephew's act
If you are willing, I am determined to keep you here with me until we learn the truth of it, until we get the law on your side. What Samuel did was not right. No. I have a trundle bed upstairs. Take the children and go upstairs and lock yourselves in the upstairs room. Yes?
My slave Kitty here and her brats. My overseer said you came down this way.
Yes, they are here, Samuel. And here they will stay until I find out who they really belong to.
We'll see about that.
Looks like no sleep for us tonight, Richard. He'll be back. Lock up well.
I will have my property.
Yes, Samuel, you will have them. But I will not wake up those poor tired children in the middle of the night. Come in the morning. I'll be responsible for them now. You come in the morning.
Oh, you'll be responsible for them all right. I'll come for them, and you know that I have more men than you could ever muster.
Yes, Samuel. Come in the morning. Just let us sleep first. Oh, such a commotion over a bunch of servants. Run to Sheriff Walden. Wake him up. Ask him to come and get Kitty and the children before dawn. Yes. Black Yes. They're going to have to be locked up in jail until their freedom is proved. For their own safety.
This was the letter that brought us the good news. Yes, indeed. With the sheriff's help, the family got safely to the jail of all places to find us a refuge. In fact, in the end, they lived in the debtor's room upstairs at the jailer's house for 11 months. The jailer was kind and played with the children in the yard. Our Manalapan Quaker meeting here in Pennsylvania got in touch with the Goose Creek Quaker meeting in Virginia, and we worked together for Kitty and the children. Yardley Taylor wrote this to our Cyrus Christ.
As we
2020's Abolitionists Day was also a celebration of the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. In the following film clips, Ross Hetrick gave the historical perspective, Judy Williams presented Sojourner Truth, a portrait in words and song. And with Christina Gladfelter's kind permission, we adapted her 1986 play and presented Anna Dickinson Fighting for Freedom and the Vote. Dickinson was a passionate speaker who, at the age of only 18, helped to win numerous elections for Republicans by demanding that the Civil War be won in order to free the enslaved. Like other suffragettes, Dickinson learned to campaign through her fight against slavery.
A lot of people don't realize that women were much of the backbone of the abolitionist effort during the 19th century. And they also sort of felt like it was their time to get the vote. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. I was listening to a dress rehearsal right before we started today, and one of the lines from Anna Dickinson is, and let me make sure I get this right, promises made in the dark are forgotten in the morning, which sort of seems to sum up male-female relations in a lot of cases. But I want you to know, Thaddeus Stevens definitely had the ladies in mind when he came up with the original version of the 14th Amendment. If his version had gone through, women may have had to vote 50 years before they got it. But unfortunately, there were only men in Congress at that time. And they actually, in the 14th Amendment, they put the word male in the amendment. And Thaddeus Stevens was not happy about that. And he said, I have another objection to the amendment. The proposition is to apportion representation according to the male citizens of the states. Why has this been put in the word male? It was never in the Constitution of the United States before. Why make a crusade against women in the Constitution of the nation? Is my friend as much afraid of their rivalry as the gentlemen on the other side of the House are afraid of the rivalry of the Negro? I do not think we ought to disfigure the Constitution with such a provision. I find that every unmarried man is opposed to the proposition. Whether married men have particular reason for dreading interference from that quarter, I know not. I certainly shall never vote to insert the word male or the word white into the national Constitution. Unfortunately, he had to eat his words. He was not really satisfied with the way the amendment came out, but he said, believing then that this is the best proposition that can be made effectual, I accept it. I shall not be driven by clamor or denunciation to throw away a great good because it is not perfect. I will take all I can get in the cause of humanity and leave it to the perfected, to be perfected by better men in better times. It may be that time will not come while I'm here to enjoy the glorious triumphs, but that it will come is as certain as that there is a just God. So, Thaddeus tried, but didn't do it. And so now I'd like to turn over the podium.
Use admission to college strictly on the basis of their sex. Women cannot gain profitable employment. A married woman is legally dead in the eyes of civil law. She cannot own property. She cannot keep her wages. She is not the legal guardian of her children. The 19th century woman is a slave in this society as surely as our black brethren. We hear so much these days of the work of Florence Nightingale among the sick soldiers in the Crimea. Why is it not honorable for a woman to administer to the sick as physicians? Would any here today who know her say that Dr. Hannah Longshore is not an honorable woman? I do not think so. The men and women who would deny the vote to fully half God's creatures say it is not fitting for a lady to go abroad among a rough crowd of men to cast her ballot. Yet it is mandated for that same lady to go abroad among that same rough crowd of men to pay her taxes. When we placidly accept the laws that place us in the same category as minors, lunatics, and idiots, then we surely are the latter if we do not rise up and challenge such gross inequality. Ladies and gentlemen of Boston, this is our sad roll call. Bull Run, Falls Bluff, the 7 Days, Groverton, Bull Run again. This is the unhappy history of the Army of the Union, defeat upon defeat. Where must the finger of blame point? Squarely at our generals. Hear their names: Banks, McDowell, Pope, and George B. McClellan, who, if he is not a traitor, is most unfortunate in his selection of friends. After months and months of waiting, when the feeling of the country finally drove him down the peninsula to Yorktown, he found it defended by empty entrenchments and wooden cannons. Then, advancing towards Richmond, he was outmaneuvered at every step.
I say McClellan is a good man. Let's hear 3 cheers for the general.
Sir, there is to be but one speech here tonight, and it is mine. I hope these names are soon forgotten, swept away by history's tide with new names of battles won and generals victorious. Names like Ulysses Grant, who in a thrilling victory captured Fort Donelson in the West. I can see him now on the eve of battle, riding among his men, encouraging them, cajoling them, urging them on to triumph against the enemy. I ask you here tonight, be like those men. I encourage you, I cajole you, I urge you to know that slavery is the enemy. It is the cause of this war, and this war will not be won until slavery is abolished. Are you ready? When the order comes to send up word to our general in Washington, not merely that you desire it, but as those men said in Fort Donelson, we will have it, and step forward in the advance to take it. Thousands of graves and trenches, crowded with the best loved of our land, offered up for your sake, ask you. Hundreds of thousands of brave fellows on the battlefield, facing death, ask you. 4 million of the oppressed people with manacled hands that reach up to God, ask you. Are you ready to march against the ramparts of slavery? Mount them with one determined bound, and on the ruins of the shattered system, plant the stars and stripes, proclaiming its proud message in characters of living liberty and freedom for all. Are you ready, America? Answer yes, we are ready. We are ready now.
Anna, on the campaign trail, 1863. That's a wonderful speech, Miss Dickinson. Wonderful. Now, on to New Hampshire.
Thank you. It will be an honor to speak on behalf of abolitionist candidates like Mr. Gilmore, even though at times the Republican Party gives weak tea where strong medicine is needed.
Well, we are getting stronger, and your powerful words will help us defeat those copperhead Democrats who would cease the war and negotiate. We have just 20 minutes to catch the train. Are you ready?
Off we go.
The Dickinson home, Philadelphia. Mother, she was in Bennington, New Hampshire. What else than the living truth could have inspired this young girl, this Joan of Arc, to stand unabashed in the presence of thousands and electrify them?
member of the State Republican Committee in New Hampshire. Prescott, my vote is nay, no, absolutely, without question. Gilmore isn't the only one running for state office in this state.
I realize that.
I will have a tough enough time as it is. So Prescott, do not send that damn woman into my hometown to undermine my election.
Boo. As you wish.
Dover, New Hampshire. It is only once in a great while that an audience here is permitted to listen to such a flow of patriotic eloquence and inspiring words. Miss Dickinson is a very remarkable person.
Prescott, don't be so damn contrary. I want that woman. I need that woman. She's a miracle worker. I need her to save my election.
Sir, her schedule is announced and published. You would not have her when you could. Now, you cannot have her when you will.
Lebanon, New Hampshire. It is sufficient to say that wherever she has been, and she has spoken about 20 times, her audiences have been the fullest of any during the campaign.
And they named me Isabella. Now, as a child, I served several masters, and I suffered under all of them. The one I remember most is Mr. John Dumont. Master Dumont, I worked for him from 1810 until around 1826. And at the age of 14, Master Dumont married me to an older slave by the name of Thomas. And he and I together had 5 children: Diana, Elizabeth, Sophia, Peter, and Hannah. Now, around 1826, I walked away. I didn't run away from Master Dumont, because he had promised year after year to give me my freedom, and year after year he did not, so I took it. I ended up at the home of the Isaac Van Wagenen family, and they were a family of abolitionists. So when Master Dumont came looking for me, the Van Wagenens paid him $20 for my freedom. And shortly after that, I got word that Master Dumont had illegally sold my son Peter into slavery deep down into Alabama. And I was very upset. I didn't know what to do, but somebody told me to go to the magistrate's office. And I did. And you know what I ended up doing? I sued that man for selling my son. And it took a little while, but I won my case and I got my son back too. And shortly after that, I moved to New York City. I began to attend the White John Street Methodist Church. And then I went to the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. And at that church, I met for the first time 3 of my older siblings. Well, because of my religious experience, I began to preach at some of the camp meetings. And then on June 1st, 1843, I was so moved that I knew I had to change my old way of living. And not only that, I changed my name. No longer was I Isabella Longfrey, but I was Sojourner Truth, a traveling preacher. And I set out to embrace Jesus, but not only to embrace Jesus, but I started to share the story of my life as a slave. I wanted people to know the horrors and the indignities that I had to endure. And oftentimes, my story was not believed, it was questioned. I was often accused of being a man, for I spoke so forcefully, and I was a big woman. I remember at one of the meetings where I was speaking, some men in the group started heckling me, saying, "She's not a woman. That can't be a woman. A woman can't talk like that." And it upset me so much that I tore open my blouse and I exposed my breasts to the crowd. And that stopped them right there. And you know, it embarrassed them more than it did me. Well, through my travels and the different religious groups I belonged to and the abolitionist groups that I joined, I got to meet Mr. Frederick Douglass, the abolitionist Mr. David Ruggles, and of course, Mr. William Lloyd Garrison. In 1846, I bought a house in Florence, Massachusetts. And in 1849, I met a Mr. George Thompson, who was an anti-slavery member of the British Parliament. And he asked me to travel around with him and share my story of my life as a slave. And at the same time, I had begun to dictate my life story to my friend, Olive Gilbert. Not only did she write my story down, but she helped me to get it published in a book, The Narrative of Sojourner Truth. And I used the money from the sale of that book to help pay the mortgage on my house, and also to help pay for some of my travels when I went around to speak. I stayed in Florence for a little while until I decided to move to Battle Creek, Michigan. Why? Because I had family and I had friends there. And I built this big old house for my children, my grandchildren, and for me to live in. Now, around this time, the war had already started, and the Emancipation Proclamation had initially gone out, which meant black men could fight. And I urged my son to enlist in the 54th Massachusetts, and he did. And not only that, I went to Washington City. And when I went there to help my refugee brothers and sisters who had fled to the city to get away from the war in Virginia and Maryland. I worked for the Freedmen's Bureau. I worked as a nurse in the contraband camps. I also taught domestic skills to the women. I felt so badly for my people, for many had worn, torn rags for clothes, and most had no shoes. They had no jobs, they had no resources, and something had to be done. I decided that I was going to match the refugee workers up with businesses in Rochester, New York, and in Battle Creek, Michigan. Well, that worked very well for a while, but then it became such an overtaxing job that I had to stop it. Well, in 1864, I had an opportunity to go to the White House and meet with President Abraham Lincoln. He was the kindest gentleman I have ever met, and he listened to every word that I said. And I must say, and I'm proud to say, that I have never been treated with such kindness as I was that day with that good and great gentleman. He spoke of us meeting again, but of course, that never happened. I continued my efforts supporting the needs of my people. I began to I traveled to Kansas to give them support. And when I returned home, I was worn, I was weary, but I still talked about what my people needed. I still talked about human rights. And in fact, I fought hard for my people. I fought hard for civil rights for them. I fought hard for human rights for everybody. I fought hard for women's rights. And I fought hard for voting rights. Everybody wants to be treated fairly, no matter what the color, no matter what your race, no matter whether you're a man or woman. Before I take my seat, I would like to share with you a song we used to sing in some of the abolitionist meetings. You know the tune, "My Country, 'Tis of Thee," but the words are a little bit different. My country, 'tis of thee, stronghold of slavery, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, where man's rights derived from every mountain side, thy deeds shall ring. My native country thee, where all men are born free, if white their skin. I love thy hills and dales, thy mount and pleasant vales, but hate thy negro sails of foulest sin. Our fathers God to thee, author of liberty, to thee we sing. Soon may our land be bright with holy freedom's light. Protect us by thy might, great God, our King. Thank you.
Good afternoon or good morning, whenever you're watching this. My name is Scott Hancock, and I teach history at Gettysburg College. I'm in the History Department, Africana Studies, and as Ross mentioned in the introduction to the video, I was part of the effort to speak back to the kind of unending and often undisputed discourse of glorification of the Confederate monuments and Confederate symbols that started here. Well, it's been going on here in Gettysburg for quite some time. But as Ross mentioned, some of this got its impetus from the March 4, 2016 event when the Sons of Confederate Veterans wanted to celebrate Confederate Flag Day at the Peace Light. And so Ross's idea and some discussions with me and others was that we needed to have something that celebrated Gettysburg as a site of freedom and equality. And so he has been the chief organizer and impetus behind Abolitionist Day. It's a tremendous event. It's the only thing of its kind aware of in Gettysburg that counterbalances in a really effective, organized way the repeated kind of commemorations and glorification and sacralization of the Confederacy. And I think Abolitionist Day does this in some really insightful, intelligent ways. It ties together the key debates that involve abolitionism in the antebellum era. It doesn't portray abolition as just a monolithic front, but they get into some of the ways that abolitionists were wrestling with these issues. In the videos that you'll see and of past Abolitionist Day, you'll see them connect issues of citizenship that they understood were inseparable from Black freedom and equality, such as Thaddeus Stevens' allegiance to women's suffrage. Excuse me. And they capture the range of involvement really effectively. You've got Black women like Sojourner Truth. That's near the end of the video that I watch. You have Black women, white men. You have young and old speakers. And part of what's really impressive, I think, about Abolitionist Day is they've done the research. And I say this as someone I've witnessed, I've gone to Abolitionist Day, I've witnessed much of what they've done, but I'm not a participant in it, so I don't have any investment or bias in that way. But speaking as a historian, I'm really impressed with the level and depth of research, and the level of preparation is really impressive. It's not just simply that they've memorized so much, but the attention to getting so much of the history right, in contrast to what we see when we see the Confederacy glorified here in Gettysburg. And so this effort that Ross and the Thaddeus Stevens Society and others have engaged in to provide a different, more inspiring, uplifting, and historically grounded story of the American past and what led to the Civil War that produced the Battle of Gettysburg and eventually ended slavery and emancipation is extremely well done because they get so much of the history right. For instance, they've recaptured the value that 19th century Americans placed on the spoken word and wrestling intellectually and publicly with critical kinds of issues. And it often was a wrestling. I think that's epitomized one part of the video that I watched, the young white woman who was speaking about women's suffrage is heckled by a man about McClellan. I think it's during the 48-minute video I watched. And the woman speaker responds, "There is but one speech here tonight and it is mine." You know, that's exactly the kind of thing that frequently happened to Black and female speakers and white men speakers as well. People wrestled, sometimes literally physically wrestled, but I assume Abolitionists Day won't be reenacting that kind of stuff, with ideas that directly impacted people's ability to pursue life and liberty, ideas that determined whether a person could vote, could get a job, could be free or enslaved, and sometimes could live or die young. So I hope once we've managed to move beyond the pandemic, that Abolitionist Day can be held again in a historic building, like the first year's event that was at the Lutheran Seminary, or the year they did it on Middle Street, the GAR building. So when and it's been generous of Gettysburg to allow Abolitionist Day to take place at the Rec Park, but when you see concrete block around speakers, I don't think it detracts from the value of what they're doing. But since we live in a place where we regularly see people glorifying the Confederacy at the battlefield as a powerful historical backdrop, I would suggest it's only fitting that a far better researched and a much better historically grounded event like Abolitionist Day that commemorates this decades-long fight for justice and equality by Black men and women and white men and women in America, that this event is able to take place in a setting that also carries the weight of history behind it. So I hope we can resume soon.